Jordyn, thank you very much for being with us today on the Future of the Future podcast, when we talk about everything and anything related to technology and its future. First of all, I would
You
like
got
you.
it.
Thank you. I would like you to introduce yourself and talk a little bit about your story and how you got to be the amazing product leader you are today, right? You started as a web developer over 20 years ago, created
Yep.
websites for rock stars like Madonna, and then got to be a founder, got to be a product consultant. Tell us a little about yourself.
Yeah. Well, you gave the outline, but I'll fill it in a little bit. So over 20 years ago, we won't say how much over 20 years ago, I started making websites because I was in a rock band in college, and we were at practice one day and someone was like, we need a website, which was like a new thing people were doing. And everyone in the room just looked at me and I was like, I guess I'm making the website. Okay. So I wandered into the computer lab at school and went up to the guy who was running the computer lab. And I was like, how do I make a website? I have no idea what that guy's name is. I wish I remembered, because I have him to thank for the career that I have. But he helped me out. He was like, here's Netscape. It's got an editor in it. Have a nice day. And I was kind of off to the races. I built a bunch of websites for departments at school. Continued making websites for bands that I knew. And then ultimately, so this all happened around the .com bust. So I could not get a job immediately doing this work. It took me a few years, but when I did, I eventually went to work for a company whose main client was Warner Brothers Music. And
Nice.
So basically for 3 years, every 2 weeks, I got to make a website for a new release. This was a period of time where artists, musicians would do a new website every time they did a release. It was like a brand thing. So with regard to Madonna.com, Madonna's on Warner Brothers. And for the Confessions on a Dance Floor release, we were the firm picked to do that. And we had a month. We had double the time we usually had. We had a whole month. And it was really, really fun. It was a great time. I learned a ton about engineering and design, and I, went on to a couple of other companies after that. But during that time, I also got really, I got kind of burnt out on engineering for a very specific reason, which is that a lot of the projects that I worked on were not well scoped or well conceived. Like, no one was consulted about the work that we were doing, and we would spend months working on something, release it, only to have no one use it, because no one had talked to a single user or customer about what it is they actually wanted. And I was getting really, really frustrated, because as much as I liked writing code, the reason I got into doing this was because I loved being able to whip something up quickly that then thousands or millions of people could see immediately. That was the exciting part about it to me, getting people to use stuff, making stuff that someone wanted to interact with. That was why I was doing it. And for a lot of projects, that just wasn't happening. So I call it swimming upstream. I was that annoying engineer who was constantly like, cool, how do we know this is what we should build? Who have we talked to? Why are we doing this? Is this a good idea? Just trying to shift projects in a direction of being more useful to users and customers. And everybody on these projects found that very annoying, because at the time, and still today, what was very prevalent was that, business would come up with some market opportunity, design would design something, and then hand a file to the engineers, who would then build it, and then you'd launch it, and then you were done.
Yeah.
This is it was waterfall, classic waterfall vibes, right? And it was super frustrating to me that by the time stuff got to me, it was already so baked in and so ill-conceived, and I couldn't do anything about it. Anyway, so I gradually started doing more user experience design and research, why don't we talk to a few users? I will do it. I'll go do all the work, just so that we can have a better sense of why are we doing this? What are we building? So that by the time we released something, it was, maybe sort of what someone wanted.
Right.
So I kind of, that trajectory is like sort of how my career went. And I was hired by one of my clients. I started freelancing and I was hired by one of my clients, a startup, as their director of user experience. What I came to realize later when we were acquired was that what I'd really been doing was product management, because I owned the roadmap. I was the person sitting there connecting the dots. We've been talking to customers. We've been looking at the market. Here's what we need to build in order to meet it. Doing a little bit of design, managing some engineers. It's a startup. I was doing all the things, but really the most important thing I was doing was making sure that we were building the right thing at the right time. So that acquiring company, I became the product manager of that piece of software at the acquiring company. Learned a ton there, ended up using that time to raise some angel money, do some sort of early stage validation for a product idea I had. Left the acquiring company to launch that. It was a very technical product, so I was actually the CEO. And I had a sort of engineer who I co-founded that with. Whole other story we could talk about, no doubt. The things we did right and the more things we did wrong, but worked on that for about 3 years. During the pandemic, decided to shut things down, as many businesses did, and took another first product person at a startup role at another startup called Brio that was doing coordinating COVID testing at the time. Super intense, like hitting a company right at product market fit was wild. And I learned so much from doing that. It was a crazy time to be working on a product like that. And I learned a lot. Ended up after that going to another startup as a co-founder. I had been an advisor for them. This was a much less technical product, so I ended up coming on as the CTO for that. It was well formed when I joined. We had a lot of traction already. Tried to raise a pre-seed round to really accelerate that. The headwinds were already a-blowing. This was like last spring, and we failed to raise. So then I, ended up now joining a product consultancy as a product strategist, where I get to help other founders at the early stage do the work I had been doing at startups prior to that.
It's been an amazing ride, a wild ride, and you learned a lot about your passion, which is product discovery, right? And continuous discovery.
Yes, exactly.
And so it's a lot of passion, a lot of experience, a lot of hard lessons learned through the way, right? But let's get started. What is continuous discovery?
So let's go back to that waterfall process that I mentioned before. That was really early on the process at play with internet-based software, specifically, but software in general, wherein you do discovery at the very start. Right. You go do some market research, you talk to customers, you identify some opportunity in the market, you validate that there's some there. Then you move into ideation, figuring out what are you going to do to meet that market need, design something, then you go into delivery and you build it. And it's just this linear thing, right? The metaphor, and honestly, our language is built around thinking of that as a metaphor of like building a building. You scope out the site, you make a blueprint, you hand it off to some contractors, right? We use that language. We also use this language of like launching a rocket, which is also a waterfall process. You do all your work up front, and then there's a moment where you launch, right? What I have learned over the many years of doing this is like, that is not what making software is like at all.
At all.
Or it certainly shouldn't be. And it's frankly causing businesses to fail, but it's also causing us to just have a world full of products that don't meet people's needs very well, because we have not figured out how to do this continuous loop. So what continuous discovery and delivery means is we never stop talking to customers. We never stop making that blueprint. It is just iterative all the live long day. And I get people are like, that's not us. We're agile. We do things in sprints, but it's like dividing your waterfall up into 2-week sprints does not make it agile, It's still a waterfall. So continuous discovery is really about that market research aspect. never turning that off. Making sure you're constantly talking to folks. And people sometimes will legit ask me like, why would I do that? Which I actually like, I'm like, great. Yeah. Ask the question. Don't just take my word for it. There's like a good reason, which is this: your market is always changing. And frankly, if you're lucky, it's changing because of you. You're making software that then changes people's behaviors, which means you need to learn anew what it is they're doing and what they need. Hopefully you're changing. You are, not only is the market changing because of forces you don't control, but it's changing because of forces you do. And I see this all the time with companies that are successful and then hit like a plateau, right, of like engagement. And it's because they have failed to continue connecting to their market and learn that they themselves are affecting user and customer behavior. So
are they getting complacent or what is it?
Yes, exactly. They get complacent. They think they've solved the problem, right? And they're like they're in the zone or whatever. But it again, people's behavior changes and things, again, there are things in the market that change due to things you have no control over. Like, we didn't know there would be a global pandemic. It changed, it upended so much, right? And if you as a company, say you had hit product market fit in 2018, 2019, pandemic hits. Do you just assume your customers' lives are exactly the same as they were in 2018, in 2021? Only at your own peril do you assume that, right? So what's the antidote? Keep talking to them. Talk to them like you did at the very beginning of your business, when you knew you didn't know what you were fully what you were solving. Keep that curiosity going. That's all continuous discovery is. And it just makes sure there are two things it does. It keeps you it keeps you real about what's going on with your customer and your user, but it also creates a ton of alignment on your team. Because another failure mode with teams over time is that people really start to specialize and they lose sight of what it is, why they're building what they're building. So engineering starts to just focus on technical debt or like infrastructure or something, right? Whereas like product is over here thinking, okay, we need to drive this business metric, and people don't have a shared understanding about where the value lies and what they're building, and therefore what is important to build next and what it's important to not build next. People like lose that over time as the team expands and specializes. But if everyone on the team is involved in discovery, you're hearing the same things and you have the same basis for decision making. So it maintains alignment. It keeps you in touch with your market and your customer and your user, and it keeps the team aligned on what's important.
Got it. Who do you think is doing this the right way? Let's not mention bad examples, but just focus on the positive, right? What are true rock stars out there that you go like, these people are really doing it the right way?
Well, so I thought about this question. We talked about this question a little bit beforehand, and this question gave me the most pause, because truthfully, without being inside of these companies, it's hard to know, right? But how you can tell from the outside, a company that immediately sprang to mind for me, two of them actually that sprang to mind for me are Notion. I don't know if you know the product Notion, but it's a sort of documentation productivity product. It started out as note taking, but it's really become so much more. They do they are very intentional. You can tell they're doing this work because they evolve, but they evolve very strategically. You can see the product evolving. What they decide to add is a result of what they are seeing people do and what they are hearing from their users, right? So they're doing a great job, I think. I think Figma is another company. We'll see after acquisition by Adobe how long this lasts. But they are another company doing this really well. They watch and they listen. What are people doing? How are their behaviors changing? Features they added during the pandemic were clearly a result of how they saw people working differently because the pandemic had happened, right? Remote work happened on a way larger scale for people, and it necessitated a different kind of collaboration in their tool than they had to support before. So it's like, you can see who's doing it well because you can see them moving with the market, and you can see them, the companies you can almost be certain are not doing it well is when there's just like, it's like a proliferation of disconnected features, right? Like you can tell there was just some stakeholder that was like, oh, we saw company X over here introduced an emoji menu. So now we need an emoji menu, but it's in some context where no one's ever using emojis. Okay, cool. You can tell that talking to customers and really getting up close with what they're doing in your app was not driving that decision, right? And it becomes this just like, when an app is trying to be all things to all people, it ends up being nothing to anyone. And you can see how that happens over time. Whereas if you're looking at a product and it's clear that they're focused on a problem set, and they're very thoughtful about when they add features, and they're very focused, and when they don't, you can tell they're doing this well. And these other companies that are just like, let's add, like let's just throw stuff at the wall and see what sticks. Like they're not talking to their customers if that's happening.
Right.
Now how I really wanted to answer that question though, and this is not to cast specific shade on anybody, but I think definitely not nearly enough. Hardly anyone is actually doing this, truthfully. And it's, people will do it in moments of crisis. And then, but it won't be continuous. They'll do discovery and then they'll stop. They'll do a discovery sprint and then they'll build for some period of time, right? We're done interviewing users for now. I do not permit such a statement. We're never done. We're never done. And I really think we're still at the beginning of this sea change, and most companies are still not doing this well because, and there's a real, there's a reason. It's not for no reason. It's a bad reason, but there's a reason, which is frankly, people don't want to know that what they're doing is wrong and that maybe they need to go in a totally different direction than how, you know what I mean? Like they're scared of what they're going to learn. If they talk to their customer.
So that was going to be my next question, and that's a great segue. So why do some people avoid it, right? Is it sometimes, it might seem like it is territoriality, right? Someone wants to be that voice of the customer and doesn't want to like let the engineering team, for example, talk to the customer directly.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
But what you're saying is that sometimes it's simply being scared of what people are going to say and how that is going to change the direction.
Yes, 100%. Although we should talk about the problem you identified too, and there are internal organizational problems that keep this from happening, because that's a huge component as well. But yes, I think a lot of people, so there's like a kind of inertia that takes over larger teams as they get into a kind of middle phase, right? Which is that you've got these long roadmaps. It's the feeling of trying to turn an aircraft carrier in the middle of the ocean. And once they've turned to go in a direction, they don't want to hear that direction is wrong because they'll have to turn the aircraft carrier again. So there's a lot of institutional sort of motivation to not be nimble because it's hard to be. It actually requires that kind of continuous discovery then necessitates an organizational structure where teams have a lot of autonomy and can make decisions and act because they need to be able to react to what they're hearing from customers. And if a company isn't organized that way, then in some ways doing continuous discovery is just painful because they're learning everything they should be doing and they're powerless to do it because they're up against maybe an engineering organization that like works on these 18-month roadmaps. And so maybe someone is doing continuous discovery and they turn to the head of engineering and they're like, hey, we're hearing this from customers. How do we get this into production? And the engineering manager is like, well, how about 6 quarters from now? So it really does require a different way of doing this work that I think a lot of companies haven't figured out how to do yet. That's one reason. So it's fear that they'll learn something that they didn't know and have to change what they're doing. But that's a real fear in some cases because they won't be able to change what they're doing. So there is a lot keeping companies from being able to do this in a nimble way. What you brought up was another good reason, which is especially I see this at B2B companies that are sales driven. Sales, it might be customer support. There are organizations where customer support really like has a lot of authority, a lot of the center of gravity, let's say, is with support. Could be sales. But those folks feel like they own customer discovery and they do not want product and engineering doing customer discovery. because they think it somehow threatens the relationships they've built with customers. And so what they want to do is say, oh, do you have questions for customers? Cool. Tell me what they are. I'll ask them. Right. And that's all well and good, but there's a couple of problems there, which is that often if you are having a conversation with a customer as a salesperson, what are you trying to do? Close a deal, retain the customer, upsell them, right? You have a real motivational. A product person, an engineer, just wants to learn, wants to really understand what's going on. It's a very different posture, and it drives a different kind of listening. And the answer to this is not product should talk to customers instead of sales. It's like everybody should be talking to customers, right? And then you get this pushback from sales where they're like, well, that's a lot of time. That's a big time commitment for our customers. I can't just constantly harass them with conversations. And it's like, first of all, it doesn't have to be the same customer. One. Two, actually, what we find at the companies that do this well, customers love being asked this. It actually makes them feel like a partner, like they're building in partnership. It makes them feel like a valued customer, like it makes them feel heard. And retention becomes way easier when they are that involved with the product. The relationship is easier to manage. So like, I know it's scary. And maybe you salesperson look at product and engineering and you're like, these people have no social skills. And I'm like terrified to like hand over my precious, connection to this company to them. That is never how it pans out. It only helps. They feel like they're getting a ton of attention from your company, and therefore they feel like a valued customer. So I get what the anxieties are, but there is no substitute for and frankly, support also has a different lens on this, right? They're not trying to upsell anybody. They're trying to like hear what's going on so they can solve the problem, but it's a different mindset, right? Everybody needs to be listening to the customer.
Which brings us to a very important next point. So how do you do it right? And you were talking about listening, right? Which is the most important part of it. But how do we do this right?
Yes. So I'll talk about the content of the conversation in a second, but let's talk first about a lot of the pushback I get from teams about this is that they also think it's too hard to get people to talk to them. That's another. So, and that's real. And it's totally idiosyncratic to your product and your customer. So like, there's no one size fits all here. Like if you have a scaling consumer facing app, it's almost like sort of the easiest thing because you can just drop something in the app at a key moment and say, hey, would you be willing to talk to us? We'll give you an Amazon gift card, whatever. You're going to get a certain percentage of people will say yes to that. Cool. That's actually like, that's hard. But it's a numbers game, and the pathway is actually fairly easy. With B2B folks, it's like really, it depends, right? But the point is, think about your market, who your customer is, what they're doing with inside of your product, and where is the best moment to intervene and ask for a conversation, and how would they expect to be compensated for that? So just think it through. But the important part is set up a pipeline of conversations. Don't automate as much of this as you can so that you are not waking up every Monday thinking, crap, I don't have any customer conversations this week. How do I get one? Because you'll be spending all this time trying to get one, and it will eat into your time where you get to listen. So step one is get a process in place where you have a constant, if you can like send out a drip email with a Calendly link, whatever it is, just make it automated as much as you can so that conversations are showing up in your calendar, in your team's calendars, and you don't have to think about it. So that's step one. Now, when you get to the conversation, what do you do? And this is where a discovery conversation is very different than like a usability interview. And this is a thing where I hear, and it's different than a sales conversation. It's different than a support conversation. So let me contrast it with a usability interview. That's a situation where you have a prototype and you're trying to get people's reactions to it, right? You show them something like, where would you click on this, right? By definition, that is like leading the witness out the wazoo, because you actually need them to like react to something. This is a different conversation. A discovery conversation is way more open. It's a series of very open-ended questions. And what you want to do is get the customer just talking about their life and their work, because what you're trying to listen for are the opportunities that you have to solve problems for them. But if you let on even a little bit about what problem you're interested in or what you're building for it, they will start to tell you what they think you want to hear. And that is just the worst. So it's really important to have these conversations in a really open-ended way. So like if I were interviewing you right now about the product, I would say, Mateo, tell me about your work. And I would stop. Right?
You wouldn't ask me about the product. You would just ask about me
Ask
and
about
what
your
I
life
do.
and what you do. Right. And I wouldn't lead you. I wouldn't say, tell me about the last time that you XYZ. I would start very high level, right? Tell me about this, tell me about how you stay in touch with your family. Maybe I've got a communication product, right? Tell me about how you stay in touch with your family. And then I stop talking. And I think a lot of people get nervous with these interviews because they feel like there's going to be a lot of dead air to fill in or whatever. People love to talk about their lives and their work, actually. They feel like, oh, someone asked me about this thing. And honestly, so many customer interviews I've done like this, I will ask one question like that at the top, tell me about your work, and I never speak again. They're just talking about their work, and it's great. If they're just talking, do not interrupt. Take notes. But you probably do have something you're trying to get at, right? So the next phase is, and I alluded to this just now, but another pointer here is not to ask about their lives and work in the abstract, but to ask about specific times they've done something. So to take the communication example, if I was like, hey, tell me about keeping in touch with your family. What I would then say, you talk about that for a while, and then I would say, tell me about the last time you called someone in your family. Then you're in story mode. You're like, okay, who did I call last? Oh, I called my brother yesterday. Here, I'll tell you that story, right? That is gold. What you don't want to say is, tell me about what an ideal conversation, like what an ideal communication, you don't want to ask them for solutions or what their ideals would be. You want to ask them about experiences and what they are doing, not what they wish were true. Because frankly, let's take an example. Like if I was like, tell me about the last time you called your mom, right? Cool. You're like, okay, I called her like a week ago. We talked for an hour. Fine. What if instead I said, tell me about how you keep in touch with your mom? What flares up in your heart? Oh, I don't call her enough. So then you flip into ideal mode where you're like, well, I call her every week, like religiously, right? You want to tell a story because you want to believe that that's what you do.
Yeah.
So what you're trying to do as an interviewer is not awaken those anxieties, but keep people focused on what they do. And in the most judgment-free zone you can possibly come up with, because you really want to understand how they are actually behaving. Where are they at? Not what is their goal behavior? What do they think is important? Like that's interesting, but many a product team has spent 6 months, a year building a thing they thought people wanted because they heard an idealized story of what people wished their behaviors were, and it's a real art to be able to get people to talk about what they actually do.
Can anyone
so all
do
of this
art?
Yeah.
Sorry, can anyone, it's an art, right? And it's very, I just love hearing you talk about it and how you go about it, right? I would just like to be present and hearing you doing it actually. But can anyone do it? Do you find that if you coach as a product coach, right? If you coach the engineering team and other teams, can all of them do it?
Absolutely. And I think it's really, anyone can do it because frankly, and honestly, I think like it would be a great job for like a chat bot because it's really just a series of prompts and then you let the person talk and you take notes and you're engaged and you're interested. And so there's really actually not a lot of work to be done. The coaching people to do this well is a matter of getting them to stop doing a bunch of things. Stop telling them what you're working on. Stop asking questions that like yes or no questions. I see a lot of people do this where they're like, would you buy a product that makes it easier to call your mom? Like, what a useless question. Like, honestly, maybe the answer is always maybe, right? That's no answer you're going to get to that. So stop asking binary questions with binary answers. stop talking and start listening, and really just like ask the open-ended question and resist the urge to lead the witness. Like it's really, and once people realize how little, it's actually less effort to do this well than to screw it up. You get to just like sit back, ask a prompt, take some notes, because all the processing you're going to do of this is going to come later. You don't need to be analyzing this in real time. Your goal in the conversation is to get them to talk about their life and their work. Because I want to stress something else as well. When you ask an open-ended question, like tell me about keeping in touch with your family, the person you're interviewing will give away what it is they find important about that, because that's where they'll start talking. If you give them an open-ended field, they'll start in the place where it is important to them. But if I do that pre-selection for them, right? If I say, tell me about keeping in touch with your family over text, right? If I go immediately to that question, they're tuning out. Maybe they never text their family, right? But I've prompted them to think about that. And so they're thinking, okay, you want to know about texting? Well, okay. I did text someone yesterday in my family about picking up some groceries on their way home from work. Okay. Right. They'll kind of zero in on this subcategory, but what they're leaving out is texting isn't important to me. But what I need to know as a product person is texting important? Is texting a way that you interact with people ever? And I've totally taken that off the table as a possible answer. So it's really easy to coach people to, it's easy to do, because you basically just need to not intervene, ask a high level question, and then stop talking and take notes. And then all the analysis, I think people get a little anxiety because they're like, oh, in this interview, I need to be analyzing what people are saying. No, you don't. You just need to listen. And just little bitty prompts. I think of it like a spaceship once it's in space, right? It's just tiny little bursts of rockets to change their direction a little bit, because there's nothing to impede you. That's how you have to think about it. Just a tiny little nudge in the conversation. Tell me more about texting, and then they just go. That's what you want, and all the analysis comes later. So don't worry about the conversation. Like that's actually the easy part. Another thing I hear from teens is like, this sounds so time consuming. Like, how long do I have to talk to someone? Not very long, actually. Like, you'll find once you get really good with your script, what are those questions? Mm-hmm. You're going to get to the valuable piece of information you're trying to find in 15, 20 minutes. This is not 3 hours of like talk therapy.
Should you record it just to avoid doing much, right? I mean, should you record the session?
Absolutely.
And look at it later?
Yes. If you can record it and transcribe it, if you can record and transcribe it, great. For keeping doing it in pairs, so someone's the person maintaining eye contact and asking questions, and someone else is writing notes, great. But if it's possible to record and do a transcript, those transcripts are also getting really good. And frankly, there's now a lot of awesome product management products out there that you can feed your interview transcripts into, and they will do a lot of the analysis for you to say, well, here we heard this phrase over and over again. Like you can do a lot of that basic sifting. You know, there's no substitute for like what you are going to think and feel when you listen to these conversations. But there a lot of the grunt work, taking the notes and like doing the basic analysis. There are a lot of great tools out there for this now. There's just no excuse, Mateo. There's no excuse. Whatever excuses
I'm
people
thinking
are
about
coming up with.
It's awful. You know what? Because I lead sales, right? And I do talk to my customers all the time, but I'm leading them like crazy. I'm learning as we go. I'm thinking about all the stuff that I'm doing wrong, but this is great because I'm learning, and now I'm thinking about, you know, I will have more questions to you afterwards, but I'm thinking about a lot of things I can do differently.
Great. Well, I want you to know also, I'm saying this to you. I have this process and this approach I learned by painfully doing it wrong for years over many companies. It's not like I arrived here magically without pain. Like, I actually got here in the most painful possible way. So oh boy, did I ever lead my witness. You know, every conversation I had about that first company I founded, TallyLab, when I was trying to validate that there was a pain. I thought I was doing it right. I was like, I will validate this market. What did I do? I'd say, hey, do you have this problem? Blah, 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 blah. Right? I was doing everything to lead people.
Leading all the way.
Oh, leading all the way. And it was, did I get useful information? I absolutely did not. Did I think I was getting useful information? I absolutely thought I was.
Very
So
good.
I'm with you.
When should we do it, right? I mean, there's the answer is sort of in the name, right? But when should we be doing this?
Yes, always. But you know, the question I think underlying there is like, what's the right cadence? It's not like you can only do discovery, right? We're doing continuous discovery and delivery. That's the goal with certainly with software. So it really is going to depend on your team and et cetera. What I say is like a baseline is getting everyone on your team, on your product team, engineering, product, design, at least one conversation with witnessing, either leading or witnessing a conversation with a customer or user at least once a week. That's the bare minimum, because it will keep them in touch. Again, it will keep them in touch with the evolution. So like this happens so often. It's so weird how once you start doing this, you get in a regular cadence of doing this. It's fascinating to watch like a sea change occur. So like you'll be talking to customers, blah, 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 like every week, it's cool. And then suddenly some week, something will change. And everybody on the team who's been talking to people gets into like your weekly meeting, whatever it is, sprint planning, let's say. Let's say you start sprint planning at the end of the sprint. You're planning the next week's sprint. You do this on Friday. Everybody comes in the meeting. Step one, what did we all hear from customers this week? What did we see in the product and what did we hear? And it's so fascinating because if you're doing this on a regular cadence, it'll be like it's really like a sea change thing. Everyone will suddenly be like, everyone started talking to me about, adding emojis this week. Like everyone wanted emojis in the app suddenly. And someone else will be like, me too. Like, I don't know why. And it's fascinating how user behavior shifts in parallel. So you'll hear something and you're like, well, that's interesting. We all heard this. Great. Make a note. Let's see if we keep hearing this, right? Because anyone who's worked on a product knows like customers are going to ask you for all kinds of nonsense that you never end up building and shouldn't build. So you make your note, like emoji menu. Okay, cool. It's like if you keep hearing it, then you go do your research. Why are people saying this? What do they want to use emojis for? Like what you dig in, right? Why? What is this? And maybe it's just some nonsense that has like nothing to do with your business proposition, like your actual value proposition. That's cool. You can kind of ignore it. But if it's a consistent refrain, and this is the thing that you get by doing this continuously. If you do it week over week, if it's a consistent refrain, and if it gets louder, you're like, okay, well, this is a signal. This is a market signal. That's what we call a market signal. And you need to then dive into when do we do this? Why are we doing it? How can we do it in a way that stays true to like what our product is? But if you haven't been listening, so if you haven't, like, imagine the contrary scenario where no one's talking to customers regularly, right? Maybe you do this thing where you talk to customers the first week of every quarter. You have customer conversation week, right? You missed 3 months of something going on. Everyone in the market is outflanking you. Things move fast out there, man. Like, look at what happened with Chat GPT, right? I'm sure this is like in your world too. Like it went from a thing I didn't know about to like a thing I think about several times a day in a span of 2 months.
Yeah.
Right.
The thing that can bring down Google in 2 months. Yeah.
Exactly. Right. So exactly. It's really there's just the cadence is everyone on the team, at least one conversation a week. And it can take many forms. You can do it in pairs. You can do it solo, come back together, share notes. You can have product tag along on a support call, tag along on a sales call, like whatever works for the company, but make it happen.
How do you identify trends? I mean, we were talking about when, okay. And you talked about something about recurrence of hearing about something, right?
Yes.
Is there a rule of thumb? How do you put your thumb on it, right? How do you feel the pulse? Exactly.
So this is another one of those things that I wish I had a hard answer for you. That's what everybody wants. It's really going to depend on your business. So everything you hear. So here, let me just give you a sense of the process. that I've run in the past and when it's been successful. You hear something, you're like, okay, interesting. Like, we're hearing this thing. I'm struggling to come up with an example that I can actually speak to, because a lot of the stuff is like proprietary to past companies and I shouldn't talk about it, right? Let's take the example we were using before about like keeping in touch with your family, right? So maybe suddenly, okay, let's say you've been working on this product and the pandemic hits and suddenly people start talking about video calls. There's like a crazy surge in video calls, but your platform has no video, right? This is a basic example. You've got stuff in flight, right? You're already working on a bunch of things. You've got your, let's say, now, next to later chart where here's what we're working on this sprint. Here's what we think we're going to work on next sprint. Here's like sometime this quarter, right? In the conversation where you're talking about that work, also have off to the side, preferably in the same visualization if you can, but somewhere, a list of opportunities you're hearing about, opportunities you're monitoring. It can be specific to your company what you call these. I tend to think about them almost like you have a hen house and there's a bunch of eggs, and some of them are gonna hatch at different times, and you're trying to figure out when an egg hatches and when it turns into something you need to do something about, right? So you've got what's in flight and what's planned, and then you've got this basket of eggs. Call them whatever you want. And these are just the things you're hearing, right? So maybe it's video calls. Like, we keep hearing about video calls. Do we want to do something about this? And with your team, the decision-making team, so usually this is someone representing product, someone representing design, someone representing engineering, and then leadership, like someone representing the business, right? You come together in that meeting, whatever the cadence is, and you're like, so this is like the third, fourth week in a row we've been hearing about video calls. Like, what is everyone hearing? You talk about it, right? Interesting. Okay. Then, so this is crucial, because you cannot let users lead you around by the nose. That's like also just really not a good idea. Then you look at, okay, what's our business? What are our business goals? What do we have in flight from a high level strategic standpoint? So let's say you do have this communication platform as an example, and we're trying to figure out, do we implement video calls in our platform? Okay, well, there's a number of questions we have to ask ourselves about where we're going as a business. What is the bigger market trend we're looking at, we think we're following? And does video fit into that? Because if it doesn't, say no. Just say no to it. Great. No, you know what? We've been hearing, like, it also has to do with the persona of the person telling you this, right? So you're talking to some customers, there's like your hierarchy of customers. Everyone's got their ideal customer, perfect fit, perfect persona. This person is we know if we can get this person in, they will be a beloved user of our product, et cetera, et cetera. And then you've got a couple of other personas that are like good, and you serve them. And then you've got some people where you're like, no, if we can avoid having these people in the platform, it's not a good fit. It's never a good fit, right? If it's those people telling you to add video, no, don't do that, right? If it's, people in the middle, then you have to make a decision. Does this fit with our business? So maybe, we have a communication platform, but it's all for the visually impaired. Well, implementing video makes no sense whatsoever. People cannot use video. So like, great, of no strategic importance to us. We're hearing it from a few of our outlier users. That's cool. Now, I'm making this sound really, really clear, and it never is. And what I want to call that out. Like, it's murky, but what is clear, and I will say this, is that if you're doing this consistently and you're having the conversation with your team, what's happening is you're building alignment over time. You're learning things every week. You're all bringing them together. What are you hearing? Okay, what's the business? What is it? Who do we serve? What's our business? Does this fit into that? And there will almost always come a moment where you're like, where it's clear to the team, like, yes, we've got the hole in our engineering planning right now. This is where we could slot it in. It's reached this fever pitch. It fits in strategically with what we're doing. Let's say yes to this. We've gotten enough idea of the feasibility of it. Or conversely, it's really clear when to say no, when your business shifts away from the thing, right? Where you figured this out, like, you know what, we keep talking about this, but it's of no strategic interest to us whatsoever. Like, but the point is, as long as you're hearing it, keep it on the board.
Right.
And make sure you make space for the conversation and trust that like clarity will emerge. But when clarity doesn't happen is when just someone internally has some pet project and it's not coming from the market. It's not coming from users. Any attempt to validate that this is something that users or customers want fails, but this person continues to be like, I really think we need to build blah, 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 right? That's like a huge red flag. That's one of those things you have to keep it on the board. You got to keep the egg in the basket. You keep talking about it, but there's no alignment just never comes together because there's no business reason to do it, right?
Got it.
I wish I had a more concrete answer. It's there's not a metric. You know?
It's a great answer. It's a great answer, and sometimes there is not a metric, but there's a way to identify trends to keep everyone aligned and to make sure that everyone is seeing the same thing, right?
Yes, exactly.
Then making the great decisions. If there was we would all be millionaires if there was a clear formula for making the decision in the perfect moment, right?
And I should say there's also this like market trend component. So sometimes people will come in and say, hey, I keep hearing about Chat GPT, like what's going on with this? Is there an opportunity for us here in our product to make use of this, right? So there are times where those things do come up. I don't want to make it seem like it's always just, if it's not coming from your customer, it's always, garbage. That's not true. But, you add the egg to the basket, you continue talking about it, and it basically like plants the seed in everyone's mind, and you keep talking about it. Like, okay, well, you know what? We started talking about Chat GPT, and then a few weeks later, I was having a conversation with a customer where they suggested this, they told me this story about what they were doing. And I see that as like a really good opportunity for us to use this. Why don't we do an experiment and see if it takes off? That is the process working. Then you get something in the product that week, you're testing it. And then alignment is great because you immediately have data. Like, is anyone using this? How did it go? Right? Because that's sort of, conversations are awesome. They also need to be connected to like data in the product.
That leads us to one of our last questions, which is what happens when you do this right? When you do continuous discovery the right way?
I mean, okay. So first of all, you stay with the market. You appear to from the outside, you appear to be effortlessly guessing where the market is going to go when really, you're doing your homework, right? So your business is better. You stay with the market over time rather than becoming disconnected from it. And just as importantly, the team alignment and there's a lot more joy to your work because it's constantly relevant. You're constantly building alignment with your team. You don't end up in these situations where product and engineering or design and engineering cannot agree about what to work on because you're all hearing the same stuff. You're having the same conversation, but it also really it's like fun because you get to put experiments into the product and find out the cadence of work has this fast feedback loop, I think, which is a lot of the folks I know that got into making software, especially internet-based stuff. One of the reasons we got into it was from that really tight feedback loop. I write a line of code, I hit save, I hit refresh, something happens. I hit upload, thousands of people are using the thing I just did. It took me 5 minutes, and now there's like something out in the world being used. That is fun. That is amazing. That's like a miracle, right? And a lot of us got into this work because of that, only to find ourselves embedded in these ossified processes where from idea to line of code to on a testing server is like 18 months of are you kidding me? The market is in a totally different place in 18 months. So it's like you don't just stay with the market when you do continuous discovery. Your team finds its joy in what it's doing again. It's the meaning is there, and you have less team turnover. You have less burnout. It's just that you find why you got into this work in the first place again. And it's like, there's just no substitute for it. So it's not just about business outcomes, I guess, is what I really think is important to say. It's also about the process of this work. And it just feels light. It feels effortless. It doesn't feel like a constant battle and like you're just in the backlog, cutting through vines, trying to figure out what to, it doesn't have that feeling. You have a kind of clarity and a kind of lightness to the work that I think all of us had when we first started doing this. and frequently have lost because we've been embedded in these like really sad waterfall processes, you know?
And we all love it. We all want to have that purpose, that fun, that joy. So definitely, I appreciate it. Jordyn, this is amazing. One last question for anyone listening that wants to get into product, right? What will be your recommendations? How do you get into product? What's important to keep in mind?
Getting into product. So that's a whole other conversation and a really big one.
Another podcast?
I would say exactly. I would say first off, make something. Come up with an idea, see what it would take to make it from scratch. Like think it through. Like what resources would I need? How would I, how can I think through this? How can I start talking to people about this pain point? Do a little bit of that. And start anyone who's like, I don't have a portfolio, I'm starting from scratch. I'm like, make something. It's fine. There's a ton of low code, no code stuff out there now. You don't have to be technical. Make a Webflow site that advertises some ideas, see if you can get some signups. Like there's a million ways to do this. I would say first off, like build something. But in terms of like product at a bigger company, you're moving into product from some other role. A great book to read is Inspired by Marty Kagan, which really talks about this whole process and how it fits into specifically software development, but I think it's very broadly applicable. Especially if you're coming from another discipline like design or development. It's a great book. There's a ton of great books out there. I'll give you a list. Like there are a million we could talk about. The continuous discovery stuff comes straight out of Teresa Torres's book, Continuous Discovery Habits. It's super tactical, really short, easy read. I highly recommend that to anyone who's already doing this work, but feels like it's lost that joy. It's lost the connection to the customer. Definitely go pick that book up. Cannot stress enough. It really will bring you back to why you're doing what you're doing.
Thank you, Jordyn. I appreciate your time. This has been amazing. I have a lot of homework to do, and I hope everyone listening to us feels the same way. I'm sure they will. So we'll stay in touch, and thank you very much.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you.